1,000 Miles Up the Nile, Section 43. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 1,000 Miles Up the Nile by Amelia B. Edwards. Chapter 15, Rameses the Great, Part 1. The central figure of Egyptian history has always been, probably always will be, Rameses II. He holds this place partly by right, partly by accident. He was born to greatness, he achieved greatness, and he had borrowed greatness thrust upon him. It was his singular destiny not only to be made a posthumous usurper of glory, but to be forgotten by his own name and remembered in a variety of aliases. As Sesosis, as Ozymandias, as Sesostris, he became credited in course of time with all the deeds of all the heroes of the new empire, beginning with Thutmose III, who preceded him by 300 years, and ending with Sheshonq, the captor of Jerusalem, who lived 4 centuries after him. Modern science, however, has repaired this injustice, and while disclosing the long-lost names of a brilliant succession of sovereigns, has enabled us to ascribe to each the honors which are his due. We know now that some of these were greater conquerors than Rameses II. We suspect that some were better rulers. Yet the popular hero keeps his ground. What he has lost by interpretation on the one hand, he has gained by interpretation on the other, and the Beau Sabreur of the 3rd Salur Papyrus remains to this day the representative pharaoh of a line of monarchs whose history covers a space of 50 centuries, and whose frontiers reached at one time from Mesopotamia to the ends of the Sudan. The interest that one takes in Rameses II begins at Memphis, and goes on increasing all the way up the river. It is a purely living, a purely personal interest, such as one feels in Athens for Pericles, or in Florence for Lorenzo the Magnificent. Other pharaohs but languidly affect the imagination. Thutmose and Amenhotep are to us as Darius or Artaxerxes, shadows that come and go in the distance. But with the second Rameses we are on terms of respectful intimacy. We seem to know the man, to feel his presence, to hear his name in the air. His features are as familiar to us as those of Henry VIII or Louis XIV. His cartouches meet us at every turn. Even to those who do not read the hieroglyphic character, those well-known signs convey by sheer force of association the name and style of Rameses, beloved of Amen. This being so, the traveler is ill-equipped who goes through Egypt without something more than a mere guide-book knowledge of Rameses II. He is, as it were, content to read the argument and miss the poem. In the desolation of Memphis, in the shattered splendor of Thebes, he sees only the ordinary pathos of ordinary ruins. As for Abu Simbel, the most stupendous historical record ever transmitted from the past to the present, it tells him a but half-intelligible story. Holding to the merest thread of explanation, he wanders from hall to hall, lacking altogether that potent charm of foregone association which no Murray can furnish. Your average Frenchman straying helplessly through Westminster Abbey under the conduct of the verger has about as vague a conception of the historical importance of the things he sees. What is true of the traveller is equally true of those who take their vial vicariously in connection with Mudie. If they are to understand any description of Abu Simbel, they must first know something about Rameses II. Let us then, while the Philae lies moored in the shadow of the rock of Abshek, review, as summarily as may be, the leading facts of this important reign. Such facts, that is to say, as are recorded in inscriptions, papyri, and other contemporary monuments. Rameses II was the son of Seti I, the second pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, and of a certain Princess Tua, described on the monuments as royal wife, royal mother, and heiress and sharer of the throne. She is supposed to have been of the ancient royal line of the preceding dynasty, and so to have had, perhaps, a better right than her husband to the double crown of Egypt. Through her, at all events, Rameses II seems to have been in some sense born a king, equal in rank, if not in power, with his father. His rights, moreover, were fully recognized by Seti, who accorded him royal and divine honours from the hour of his birth, or, in the language of the Egyptian historians, while he was yet in the egg. The great dedicatory inscription of the temple of Osiris at Abydos relates how his father took the royal child in his arms, when he was yet little more than an infant, showed him to the people as their king, and caused him to be invested by the great officers of the palace with the double crown of the two lands. The same inscription states that he was a general from his birth, and that as a nursling he commanded the bodyguard and the brigade of chariot fighters. But these titles must of course have been purely honorary. At 12 years of age he was formally associated with his father upon the throne, and by the gradual retirement of Seti I from the cares of active government, the co-royalty of Rameses became, in the course of the next 10 or 15 years, an undivided responsibility. He was probably about 30 when his father died, and it is from this time that the years of his reign are dated. In other words, Rameses II, in his official records, counts only from the period of his sole reign, and the year of the death of Seti is the year 1 of the monumental inscriptions of his son and successor. In the 2nd, 4th, and 5th years of his monarchy, he personally conducted campaigns in Syria, more than one of the victories then achieved being commemorated on the rock-cut tablets of Nar el-Keb near Beirut, and that he was by this time recognized as a mighty warrior is shown by the stela of Dacca, which dates from the 3rd year and celebrates him as terrible in battle, the bull powerful against Ethiopia, the griffin furious against the Negroes, whose grip has put the mountaineers to flight. The events of his second campaign, undertaken 2 years later in order to reduce to obedience the revolted tribes of Syria and Mesopotamia, are immortalized in the poem of Pentar. It was on this occasion that he fought his famous single-handed fight, against overwhelming odds, in the sight of both armies under the walls of Kadesh. 3 years later he carried fire and sword into the land of Canaan, and in his 11th year, according to inscriptions yet extant upon the ruined pylons of the Ramesseum at Thebes, he took, among other strong places on sea and shore, the fortresses of Ascalon and Jerusalem. The next important record transports us to the 21st year of his reign. 10 years have now gone by since the fall of Jerusalem, during which time a fluctuating frontier warfare has probably been carried on, to the exhaustion of both armies. Khedisira, Prince of Kedah, sues for peace. An elaborate treaty is thereupon framed, whereby the said prince and Rameses, chief of rulers who fixes his frontiers where he pleases, pledge themselves to a strict offensive and defensive alliance, and to the maintenance of good will and brotherhood forever. The treaty, we are told, was engraved for the Chetan prince upon a tablet of silver adorned with the likeness of the figure of Sutekh, the great ruler of heaven, while for Rameses Mer Amen it was graven on a wall adjoining the great hall at Karnak, where it remains to this day. According to the last clause of this curious document, the contracting parties enter also into an agreement to deliver up to each other the political fugitives of both countries, providing at the same time for the personal safety of the offenders. Whosoever shall be so delivered up, says the treaty, himself, his wives, his children, let him not be smitten to death, moreover, let him not suffer in his eyes, in his mouth, in his feet, moreover, let not any crime be set up against him. This is the earliest instance of an extradition treaty upon record, and it is chiefly remarkable as an illustration of the clemency with which international law was at that time administered. Finally, the convention between the sovereigns is placed under the joint protection of the gods of both countries. Sutekh of Kedah, Amen of Egypt, and all the 1,000 gods, the gods male and female, the gods of the hills, of the rivers, of the great sea, of the winds and the clouds, of the land of Kedah, and of the land of Egypt. The peace now concluded would seem to have remained unbroken throughout the rest of the long reign of Rameses II. We hear at all events of no more wars, and we find the king married presently to a Chetan princess, who in deference to the gods of her adopted country takes the official name of Ma'at-iri Neferu Ra, or contemplating the beauties of Ra. The names of 2 other queens, Nefertari and Astenefert, are also found upon the monuments. These three were probably the only legitimate wives of Rameses II, though he must also have been the lord of an extensive harem. His family, at all events, as recorded upon the walls of the temple of Wadi Suba, amounted to no less than 170 children, of whom 111 were princes. This may have been a small family for a great king 3,000 years ago. It was but the other day, comparatively speaking, that Lepsius saw and talked with old Hassan, Kashif of Dare, the same petty ruler who gave so much trouble to Belzoni, Burckhardt, and other early travellers. And he, like a patriarch of old, had in his day been the husband of 64 wives and the father of something like 200 children. For 46 years after the making of the Khitan Treaty, Rameses the Great lived at peace with his neighbours and tributaries. The evening of his life was long and splendid. It became his passion and his pride to found new cities, to raise dikes, to dig canals, to build fortresses, to multiply statues, obelisks, and inscriptions, and to erect the most gorgeous and costly temples in which man ever worshipped. To the monuments founded by his predecessors he made additions so magnificent that they dwarfed the designs they were intended to complete. He caused artesian wells to be pierced in the stony bed of the desert. He carried on the canal begun by his father, and opened the waterway between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. No enterprise was too difficult, no project too vast, for his ambition. As a child, says the Stela of Dhaka, he superintended the public works, and his hands laid their foundations. As a man he became the supreme builder. Of his gigantic structures only certain colossal fragments have survived the ravages of time, yet those fragments are the wonder of the world. End of section 43.